My name is Jo. I am based in the UK. I run a heritage consultancy called Heritech. So basically I work with museums in a number of different ways. Primarily though advising organisations on building and developing different aspects of their education and audience engagement programs. So that can be schools, but it can also be community-based education programs. I do a lot of work around ESOL, working with refugees and migrants. But what is the kind of continuing theme throughout all the work I do is looking at how museum objects can be used on-site, but also off-site. And the use particularly in the classroom and this whole idea of object-based learning. So although many of you, in fact everybody said, no, we don't know what object-based learning is, but some of you did nod when you talked about using objects in the classroom. I'm sure as we go through the morning you'll go, oh actually I do use object-based learning, I just don't call it that. I do use visual thinking and visual literacy strategies. We don't just always call it that. So for the purposes of this morning, I'm going to, there will be a little bit of theory in here for our academic partners in the room, but also just so you get a bit of a background as to how we came to think about this project and also then apply the practical approaches. So it's trying to get that balance between the theoretical and the practical, and also think also about the macro, the bigger picture. So I'm going to give a very broad approach to these methods, but what we'll hopefully do is sort of drill down into a lower level and then think about these different tours and themes. So from a just a sort of slight change from the programme. These are the things that I'm going to be focusing on primarily. For example, in the programme we talked about using journeys. Colleen will more specifically talk about that in her presentation. So as I said, today is more about giving you an overview of our thinking in the project and how you can apply this practically. And also just how you can put together handling boxes and think about using objects and building a collection of objects for yourself. I am also going to cheat because there are some lovely colleagues at the Smithsonian who have also produced some really handy videos and guides, which I'll also show you, but also give my voice a little bit of a break as well. So Jenny mentioned actually in her introduction the shift or the connection between cultural diversity. The theme of today is embracing cultural diversity in the classroom. The specific theme of our project is actually intercultural dialogue in the classroom. So today is about reflecting on how intercultural dialogue can be used to embrace cultural diversity. So just so we're, I suppose, all thinking on the same page, as it were, this is the definition that we used in a project, the 2007 project that Jenny mentioned, on intercultural dialogue in museums. That was developed by some Italian colleagues and researchers who then fed into the EU strategy on intercultural dialogue. And this is one of the definitions that we have used as part of our project. And this very much is about thinking about how we foster and encourage intercultural dialogue in a museum or in a classroom context using objects or using museum materials. So, as I said, what I want to think about today is the roots into our methods, and that sort of also comes into what our methodologies are. So I talk about methodologies as in approaches. So these are the bigger ideas that we have used in the project, our influences. So creative and critical thinking, dialogic teaching, so a reliance on verbal communication and also multisensory, which is where the object element comes into this. So I think Claudia will be distributing these slides. So those references will be there. And then what we think of as methods are the tools. So if you think of your approach, your methodology is your approach, but then your tools are your toolkit, your things that you take with you to put the dialogical teaching or the critical and creative thinking into place. And object-based learning, certainly in the museum, a museum education context, has been very much influenced by Scott Paris, Susan Pearce, Eileen Hooper Greenhill, and Falcon Deakin, who developed a contextual model of learning in the museum. And visual thinking strategies is a concept that was developed in the US and written about extensively. I've just put one reference there by Yenawine in 2012. So what is the point of thinking about all of these ideas of object-based learning, of visual thinking? Why are they important methods or tools in our approach to teaching? And really what we're driven by is changes in the curriculum, whether that's in Northern Ireland, whether that's in the UK, whether that is in Europe or globally, towards this concept of the 4 Cs, the 21st century skills. There's an emphasis at the moment that children, that our pupils are being taught ironically, because of the curriculum in a particular way, but actually it's not allowing for the skills that they need to be equipped to develop and become good citizens and develop in modern society. So there is a dichotomy there. So part of the project is addressing how we provide a forum for these 4 Cs, but also within the context of the curriculums in which we're working. So you've got our 4 Cs, so critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. You'll see you've also got the handout of the 21st century critical thinkers, because it's not particularly clear on the picture there. So that's something to, a bit of break time or lunchtime reading for you to take away. So these approaches are important, but how do we get to these approaches? We think of these as critical thinking, as the process. Again, we've relied quite a lot in the project on different definitions, but broadly speaking, this is what we accept critical thinking to be. The process that we use to reflect upon, assess, and judge the assumption. And creative thinking is the process which we use to develop ideas. So throughout the rest of the time, these 2 methods that I'm going to introduce to you, at the back of your mind, I want you to think about these 2 ideas of critical and creative thinking, how visual thinking strategies, how object-based learning support critical and creative thinking. I hope that makes some sense to date. So, as I mentioned, what is object-based learning? Object-based learning is about using objects to facilitate thinking, to facilitate multisensory elements. So there's the element of touch, there's the element of feel, and there's also that you can also bring in smell as well. And it actually uses and helps students to reflect in different ways that perhaps using a textbook or a worksheet may not support them. So we also talk about museum objects. Jenny mentioned very much that actually not all the time are we able to get into a museum. So what we've brought out today are objects which connect to museum collections, but as I say, that can be bought and found quite easily. So for us, object-based learning is using objects to create a number of different thought processes. And the first and most critical of those is thinking about questions and questioning. So in a moment, I'm going to bring some objects round, but before I do that, I think a better way of explaining it is to introduce you to this video from the Smithsonian, which explains a little bit about the pedagogical thinking that led to the development of object-based learning. So primarily, object-based learning is seen as a constructivist approach to learning. But also, it talks about the fact that actually we can all use objects in our museum, in our classrooms, that we can find in our homes, that we can find in the shops, that we can find in flea markets. They don't have to be museum objects, and they can still inspire and excite and engage.
Now that you've heard a bit about the C3 framework, I want to help you understand some of the theory that is the basis for education in museums and to demonstrate some principles of object-based learning. I'm here at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, where I work as an educator. The job of museum educators is to spark curiosity and to encourage visitors to think critically about the past, the same sort of work that you do in classrooms. To understand how we think about education here at the museum, it's important to start with constructivism. As the name suggests, constructivism is the process of knowledge construction. It's based on the understanding that learning is an active process that takes into account the experiences and the mind of the learner. In his book, Learning in the Museum, author George Hines suggests that learners must be able to associate their past experiences with the material presented. As Hines explains, the Constructivist Museum, quote, makes a conscious effort to allow visitors to make connections between the known and the new. By extension, the Constructivist classroom helps students make connections between their lives and the content of the class. So I'll show you how to use everyday objects to teach about important topics in American history. Kathy and I will also discuss this later in the course when we examine how to help students communicate conclusions and take informed action in the world. Museums emphasize informal learning, meaning that we're constantly learning through our experiences. It's the idea that we take new information, apply it to our past knowledge and experiences, and construct new meaning from it. We also talk about the kind of learning that takes place in museums as free choice learning. Informal education is based on these ideas. So these essential elements of informal education grow out of the work of Jean Piaget, a key thinker in the development of constructivism, John Dewey, who articulated the value of experience in education, and Maria Montessori, who argued that children should be given choice and independence in their learning. Another influential voice, Lev Vygotsky, believed that children's learning exists in a zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development is a term to describe the added understanding children derive by learning with and from adults and older children. This includes the idea of scaffolding, meaning that children's learning can be supported by interaction with others or through structured activities that build toward a higher learning goal. So what exactly does all of this mean? It means that I use objects to spark students' interest and to encourage them to ask questions. An object can be as simple as a shoe, a button, or a house, like the one you see behind me, and its contents, including a cookbook, as you'll see. Allowing students the freedom to ponder an object gives them ownership over their learning. It means that objects make more abstract concepts in history relatable and real. So I try to inspire connections between the individual stories of people from the past and the stories of young people today. Use simple questions about objects to scaffold students' learning. Through guided analysis of objects, students can develop content knowledge and the skills of primary source analysis. So in essence, my goal as a museum educator is to invite learners into the process of discovery, to make students and their questions, their ideas about a topic, the center of any program or activity. At the Smithsonian, we provide access to the sources that help us to build new interpretations about the past, that is, the objects themselves, and we ask questions about them. We aspire to get visitors thinking for themselves, asking more questions, and hopefully uncovering new ideas in the process. But why objects? What is it about teaching with objects that's especially useful for inquiry-based instruction? Objects might be hard to decipher, but they're fascinating. There may be few clues to tell a student what it is or why it's important, but that means students' curiosity can be piqued and they may start to ask questions, which is the start of any inquiry. Museums also hold resources including images and documents to help you and your students unpack the object or the time period that you're studying. But you may be thinking, well, that's interesting, but how am I supposed to find objects and what can I use in my classes? You may be surprised to learn where we find the materials we use for demonstrations with the public, what we call our teaching objects. These are not part of the permanent collection and so can be handled regularly. So we find these teaching objects online, we find them at estate and garage sales, we scour our closets and attics for items that can inspire students. And perhaps you can do the same.
So that was just, as you got a sense there, a short video that was part of a longer project from the Smithsonian on object-based learning. But I think for me, it just really it's a really good summary of why we use objects and helps us start to think about how we can use them in the classroom and in the museum. So I think for me, the thing that I take away mostly from that video is actually the whole, inquiry, American accent, is starting to developing that concept of creative and critical thinking, and the idea about questions and questioning. So we're going to start an activity now. Well, I want you to think of some questions. I have an object in my box which I'm going to get out in a moment, and when as soon as I get it out, I want you to just put your hands up and just to call out questions. So we're just going to use our basic WH question words to think about how we can interrogate our object. So yeah, if this object could speak, what could it say? So I'm just going to take it out. So I'm just going to walk around the room. So I'm just going to hold it up there. As I'm walking around, any questions that spring to mind, pop up your hand. Don't be shy. Yes, lady over there.
What is it used for?
What is it used for? Excellent start.
How old is it?
How old is it?
Where did it come from?
Where did it come from? Is it heavy or light?
Who owns it?
Who owns it?
Is there anything inside it?
Is there anything inside it? Lovely. Who made it? Yep.
What's it made of?
What's it made of?
Is it valuable?
Is it valuable? Lovely. Question. Anything around here?
Is it an heirloom?
Is it an heirloom?
What's the symbol of it?
What's the symbol? Yep. What's the decoration?
Where did you get it?
Where did I get it? Ooh, where's it from? Oh, sorry, Isabel. How old is it? Is it religious? Or was it made out of? So yeah, so these are all just starting to help us think about the object. Now, when we use objects in the museum and in the classroom, indeed, we don't always know the answers. And actually, as that video and as Jenny pointed out, we don't always have to know the answers. It's the questioning and the discussion that the object prompts that is the main factor within this. It's not about me as a museum person knowing all the information. And a lot of the objects that I work with, I often don't really know a lot of information about them. But what I'm doing is thinking about those questions and how we can develop those questions and thinking further. And then also how students and pupils can relate those to their own experiences. So, I mean, in the video they were talking, I mean, she was very much talking about using objects for history and historical inquiry. But through the project and in ways of seeing, particularly in ways of seeing too, we use objects not just for historical inquiry, but connecting to RE, to geography, music. So it's very interdisciplinary in relation to the school curriculum as well, which is one of the really nice things that objects and visual literacy can bring to us. And then we can build and connect on that, both in pre-visit work and post-visit work. So I'm going to bring, I'm with my help of Jenny and Clodagh, going to bring an object to each table. So if you want to start, so first of all, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to just pass it around. So 2 minutes just to pass your object around. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is if you could just clear a space in the middle of your table, can you put your object or objects in the middle of the table? Marvellous. And you have some Post-its and some pencils, or you can use your pens. And I would like you to write down as many questions as you can about that object. I'm going to see how many questions each table manages to generate. I'd like you to try and generate at least 10 questions. Can you put one question per post-it? It's really important that it's one question per post-it. Fabulous. Now, what I'd like you to do is see if you can group types of questions together. So, are there some questions that could be grouped together? Maybe something to do with material, for example, or materials. So, can you group types of questions together?
I can quietly set up so that I can just move the things.
Actually, just from a starting point of our very basic question words that we use in the classroom every day, we've started to generate lots and lots of ideas and lots of questions. And whether it's, sort of starting point of 10 questions or whether it's 21, we can take those ideas and questions into different angles. Now, I'm hoping this is going to, no, it's not going to work, the flipper. So what you might have noticed when you started to categorise or organise your questions, you might have seen that some of your questions start to fall into some of these categories. So materials, we talked about. Production, so how it's made. Use, social implications. It's a bit of a funny term, but I think we can sort of see. So it's how it's, the value. Well, we talk about aesthetic value and the historical implications, but relation to other objects. So some of you did have two objects that related to each other. So the table at the back, the object's history, and complementary information. So that's all well and good, and that's great because that starts thinking around the object in a way. So it starts to explore and think about the object in a number of different ways. But actually, how then can we relate it to a subject or a topic? So what we then need to do is then start to put the objects into some sort of context. So whether they are religious objects, so we've got a bell, we've got the prayer flags over here, and actually most of the objects that we do have here do have some sacred or faith-related elements. So we've got some prayer beads and a bracelet with a prayer on it. We've got some amulets and a mini book of Psalms in there as well. But we've also got historical objects. So we've got little Egyptian shabtu over here. And then objects which actually you might think, well, how or why are these useful or relevant to a discussion? So yes, we'll come to this one here. So we have a contemporary object, a modern object, a T-shirt. What did this group make of this object? What were some of the questions that you asked about?
Does the symbol belong to a particular country? Is there writing incorporated into the design? Is there a message in the design? Are the colours symbolic of something? What does the symbol mean? Is it a group logo, or is it something that you wear if you belong to a certain society? Does it come in other colours? Where is it made? How much did the person get paid who made it? Is it mass produced? Can you buy it on the internet?
Yeah. What's really nice about this object is that I use T-shirts like these and things like the prayer flags to talk about sacred texts and what we mean and understand to be sacred texts. Because often when we think in terms of faith and religion, we're thinking about holy books. But actually texts and sacred texts appear everywhere, as do symbols. So we've got the Om symbol here printed on this T-shirt. And people often find that quite surprising to think, well, actually, if it's on a T-shirt, what is its value? Is its value any different printed on a T-shirt to a prayer or a religious symbol that's on a prayer bead or on an amulet? And in fact, all of the objects that you have used today were all either purchased in museum shops or on the internet. They're not accessioned objects, they're not museum objects. I use this all the time. Everybody thinks it's really, really special and important. It must be something really special from I work at the British Museum and I bring it out and they go, oh, this must be something really valuable from the British Museum. No, it was given to my husband as a gift, but it's a really great object to work with. And there will be objects that you have, that you've collected over your lives. There's places where you, as I say, second-hand shops, flea markets, places where you can find objects. We put, I think Colleen's going to do a little bit more about with some objects as well, but we put together handling bags with spices, with pigments as well, so rocks and stones, and drawing and art materials as well. So all these can be put together relatively easily. And then they can be used and supported by online images and objects. So after the tea break, we're going to come back and then think about how we can connect our objects to images as well. And then how we can connect those to the certain themes like journeys, like sacred, like fashion as well. So I think it's about time for a tea break. I will come and collect the objects. So time for a break. Thank you very much for your time this morning. And then we'll come back in about 15 minutes.